Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about harvesting soybeans and seeing discolored beans on the combine. Why are they there? What could a farmer have done to prevent that this year?
Well, after all the hard work of raising those soybeans throughout the whole year, fighting weeds, fighting insects, keeping diseases out, all those things and all the weather things, to have discolored soybeans, well, no farmer wants to see that. And especially if it impacts their price when they get to the final market. So discolored beans can be a big deal. So believe me, farmers take this very seriously. When they see discolored soybeans, they immediately ask those questions, Brian, why did this thing happen in my field?
All right, but let's start with something that we know is going to happen. That's what we call the hilum and the color of the hilum. So it's going to be basically where that bean has connected to the pod, and that a lot of times will be a dark color, black, brown, something like that. But it sometimes can streak through the bean. Doesn't really hurt anything, it's no big deal, but explain what's going on.
Well,
there.
some of that can strictly be a weather stress thing. Like for example, we had some severe drought in certain areas where soybeans were grown this year, and sometimes you see that bleeding hilum, or kind of the streak from the color of that hilum heading out across the seed coat. It doesn't really penetrate into the seed itself, but you do see it on that outer coat. Now, Brian mentioned those hilums in general. There are different hilum colors, and this is a genetic thing. So when breeders are making those crosses, sometimes they'll have a clear hilum. Well, if they get those clear hilums, they often get used in food grade type soybean applications where you don't want to see little pieces of black in there that might look like a mouse dropping or something like that as those soybeans are getting processed. So there will be different hilum colors, and yes, if you have some really crazy weather, and it's not very common, but if you do, you can have a bleeding hilum.
All right, so that's kind of naturally occurring, no big deal, doesn't hurt anything. But let's talk about the discolored beans. The reason is it could be disease or an insect, just something bad that's actually happening in that plant. Also, you'll see shriveled beans sometimes. So all these things that look, let's say, out of place, that's really what we wanted to focus on today.
Well, one of them that I'll start with is if soybeans are purple, clearly there's something going wrong. Soybeans aren't supposed to be purple. Well, oftentimes it could be from a disease like Cercospora, for example. And I remember when I was younger, I saw a whole wagon full of purple soybeans, and I asked the farmer, what happened here? And he said, you know what? I had terrible disease. My soybean leaves looked almost like leather. And I kind of looked it up, so I'd never seen this before, and it was Cercospora. And so the next year, the farmer used a fungicide, sprayed the beans, protected them from Cercospora, and they turned out fine. But some of those traits can go once you've got it on the seed. If you plant that seed back, you could be putting disease back out in your field, and it could be too much to fight. So if we see diseased seed like that, it's best to dispose of that seed, get rid of it, and plant some good clean seed the next year.
All right, in addition to the disease thing, let's talk about insects real quick. If an insect disrupts the flow of water and nutrients in the plant, then that can lead to shriveled seeds, sometimes discolored seeds. The other thing that insect can do is it can actually carry disease. It can be a vector, so it can introduce disease into the plant, or when it makes some kind of hole in the plant, whether it's in the stem or in a leaf, then it opens the plant up for disease. So anytime disease impacts that plant, it might turn purple. It might turn some other color too. So the big thing is, as farmers, what we're looking for at harvest is we want to make sure the grain quality is good. If it's not, we kind of go back to the drawing board and we say, all right, next year I'm going to improve this. I'm going to scout better for insects, or I'm going to spray earlier for disease, or maybe more often for disease, because the better the grain quality, usually the better yield as well. Unfortunately, as farmers, we don't get paid for the greatest quality versus just good quality beans at this point in most cases. Someday maybe we will, so there's more incentive for us to raise better quality beans, but I just look at it as, hey, the better quality I have, the more yield I usually have to go right along with that.
Well, raising great quality soybeans is something farmers strive to do. They don't want to see discolored beans in there, but they also don't want to see any weeds out in those fields. If you have our Weed of the Week, we'll show you how to stop this one coming up later in the show.